Hey everyone, my name is Chase. I just wanted to make a quick video about troubleshooting some really common issues that happen in Airsoft, particularly just light mechanical work, things that don't necessarily require you to get into your gearbox. A lot of these are issues that are going to happen on the field. I prepared a little slideshow with some bullet points, but we're just going to go through and I'm going to try to explain these as best as possible, and we're going to one-take Andy this and see if we can get through it. So the first thing that you're going to run into are really the common issues, and I wanted to go through these and really the ease of figuring them out. So you've got your motor height. That's a really common issue that people run into. The screw just sort of backs itself out. Overspin is really common that people run into when they're upgrading or they're using a more powerful battery, stuff like that. Piston lockback occurs a lot of times on replicas without ETUs that just have a mechanical trigger. Mid-cap syndrome is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It is unreliability that is incurred when using specific mid-cap magazines. ETU shutoff, squib loads, short circuits, and unreliable feeding, and we're going to get into all these in detail. So before we start, let's go over the tools that you should have on you if you're going to start teching and troubleshooting your airsoft guns. The first thing that you're going to want to look at is some reliable tools. Down here I have my iFixit Mako kit. This generally has every bit that you'll need. If it doesn't have it, I have this Cobalt kit that has a long shaft for the attachments, which is really handy for getting inside buffer tubes if you're looking to remove a spring, and the buffer tube has a long key in it. So the hex key set, that's over here, and the long shaft, you want to make sure you have that. And lastly, or I should say primarily, is your unjamming rod. You always want to make sure you have something that will fit the length of your barrel that can go from one side to the other. Our first issue is motor height. So the symptoms that you're going to hear are going to be like a grinding sound. It's not going to sound super smooth. The motor may be spinning, so you'll hear it whir, but it's not actually cycling the replica. Or no movement at all despite the motor getting power. So you may hear the motor kind of click. It'll go click, click on and off, and then you're not getting any movement. That is likely caused by your motor height being too low. The grinding sound and the motor spinning is usually caused by too loose, which is more oftentimes what happens. However, if you're putting a new motor in or you're putting a new grip on, it may be cinched down too tight and you may be running into too tight of a motor height. The fix is really just to adjust the screw on the bottom of the motor grip until the grinding sound stops. This is assuming that your shimming has already been done properly. Overspin. So over here we can see the piston is like halfway back inside the cylinder here. What'll happen is it might get jammed in here, and we'll discuss that in the next one. But overspin, the symptoms can be that it'll double fire on semi-auto. The semi-auto may cut off, so like it'll spin and you'll pull the trigger again, it'll shoot, and then you'll pull the trigger again and nothing happens on semi-auto. That's when your cutoff, it's spun and your gear is essentially stuck on the cutoff lever. Or if you're shooting it and you notice the piston frequently rests at the full rear position. That's supposed to say rear, but that's essentially when it's sitting back here. Fixes are usually it's because the gearbox is spinning too fast. It has too much inertia in there. So you can either downgrade your battery voltage. If you're running an 11.1, I've had people with low ratio gears and a high speed motor, a high power motor, run into issues with 11.1s. And they find that they still have excellent trigger response on a 7.4, but they overspin on the 11.1. If you have an ETU, an electronic trigger unit, consider turning on active braking, unless you have a brushless motor. And if you're experiencing a lot of overspin, maybe you want to consider changing the gearing ratio, because if you're overspinning, it usually means that you have some surplus power left in the system, and maybe increasing the gearing ratio or decreasing the gearing ratio will get you, will trade in some of that torque for some speed. Piston lockback. So this is sort of a problem state that can occur from the overspin where it locks back in the back, but it's not exclusive to that. The piston will be in the full rear position. The motor is not strong enough to pull it forward. So when your gears are spinning, it may not seem like it, but there is inertia, there's momentum going on inside there. And sometimes with a lot of beginner replicas that don't have super powerful motors, if that power cuts off when the spring is all the way back, it doesn't have enough torque to actually overcome the tension of the spring all the way at the back. It kind of relies on the movement, the inertia, and the momentum in the gears to cycle it at its full extent. So if it locks up in the back, you may be out of luck. The motor may not be powerful enough. And if you don't have an ETU will usually fix this because it'll always cycle the trigger fully. If you have a purely mechanical trigger, if you are in semi-auto and you release the trigger too soon, before it fully cycles, that can cause this issue. The best thing to do is really just take off your buffer tube. If you have to take out the gearbox, remove the spring in the spring guide, cycle the gearbox a little bit just so you can move the piston back forward, put the spring back in, put the gun back together, you're good to go. If you keep running into this issue, just try to make sure that you're holding down the trigger all the way until the round comes out of the gun on semi-auto. Don't just tap the trigger and expect it to fire all the way, because you will run into some of these issues. Mid-cap syndrome. I put the EPM ones here because these have been the most guilty from people coming up to me about this. The symptoms are generally unreliable firing of BB, usually high spread in FPS and accuracy, and contrary to some other things, the gearbox should sound completely fine. You're not going to really hear any issues with the gearbox itself because it's not with that. What happens is that a lot of these mid-caps and a lot of modern ones that have very strong springs and a very long track in here, when the BBs are all the way filled up in here, the spring is under the most tension. And then the BBs actually impart a upwards tension on the nozzle. And that can cause your nozzle to scrape inside the hop-up chamber. It cannot do that. But essentially what it's doing is it's putting too much friction on there for the tappet plate or your tappet spring to reliably feed the BBs. The best thing you can do is figure out the sweet spot for where your magazines start working. So I ran into this on my 250 round SR25 magazines at first. What I would do, I would fill them up all the way. I would use the little release lever at the top, release about 10 BBs, put it in the gun, take about 5 shots, see if it worked. If it didn't work, take another 10 BBs out, take a few shots, and just do that until you can reliably feed every round. Between games or between game days, it's best to just leave the magazines fully stored with BBs in them, and that way your spring will just kind of decompress over time, or I should say compress, and lose a lot of its springiness. You shouldn't have any problems with RPS with that, but it will help with the tension on your nozzle. ETU shut off. So the symptoms of this are no power after a few shots. So you may be taking a few shots, you may go boom, 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 and then your ETU cuts off. You may get no power after not firing for a minute. So you may shoot, you may get in an engagement, relocate, go somewhere else, and then you try to take another shot, and lo and behold, your gun's not shooting. You might also pull the trigger and your ETU beeps. It goes beep, beep, beep. Might do nothing at all. Or it might show some lights like you can see through the trigger guard here. The first thing you should do is unplug and reconnect your battery. Just make sure that maybe what'll happen sometimes is a lot of the ETUs that are out now have what they call smart fuses, where instead of blowing themselves up, they will just shut off. I can't confirm, but I think the SEMA Platinum ETU was having a lot of these issues, particularly in the SR25s that were using higher strength springs and stuff. So they were drawing more amperage and causing the smart ETUs to shut the fuse off. If it is consistently doing that, check through your trigger to make sure that it's not producing an error code of some kind. If it is blinking lights or blinking different series of lights or colors of lights, you should really check that out. Consult with the manual of your ETU. And if it continues happening on the regular, it's usually caused by an overamperage event. So think of your gears are being put under extra load, the motor's having to draw extra power to cycle the gears. That could be a sign that maybe something's in your gearbox. It could be a sign that maybe a gear is given out. It could be a sign that a bearing is given out. But if you're consistently experiencing these, you may want to check to make sure your gearbox is running smooth on a regular basis. Squib loads. So this is a term that's pretty commonly used in the firearms community. It refers to when a bullet does not have the sufficient energy to fully exit the barrel, and it essentially is just in this case a BB getting stuck in the barrel. This is from a rental gun I was working on. You can see right here, this was the first BB that was in the barrel. That was the second BB that was in the barrel. This one clogged up almost near the end, and the entire barrel was just filled with all these BBs that poured out. So the symptoms are your replica cycles, but no BBs come out, or it makes a muffled sound on firing when it shoots. Instead of, having a snappy sound that signifies the air coming out of the barrel, it just kind of goes boom, boom, boom. Usually that means there's something stopping it. If you notice this happening, the first thing you should do is stop shooting immediately. Don't keep trying to put more rounds through the replica. It's not going to unjam itself. It's just going to make the problem worse. These replicas, since they run on compressed air even via the piston and cylinder, if there is a seal in the barrel, a gun with a good seal will make it so that the spring can't overcome that air pressure that's building up in there. And then if you keep trying to cycle the gun, the piston may not be fully reset. And in that case, you're going to, at best case, shred your piston gears entirely. At worst case, you may shred your sector gear, throw a bearing, or just cause the gears in your motor to self-destruct. It cannot be overstated how much you should just stop. If this happens, take your barrel out. Usually if it's an M4 or even an AK, take your magazine out, take your barrel out, see if you can look down it, and then use your unjamming rod and make sure that you get it all the way through. I usually try to go through the hop side first to try to push through. Sometimes, however, you'll need to go through from the muzzle end first. Just to make sure that doesn't happen in the future, it's usually caused by debris in the barrel. It's usually caused by, imperfections in BBs. So make sure you're using high quality BBs and make sure your barrel is free from debris that will cause it to squib. Short circuits. As you can see in this picture here, this wire has been rubbed raw from the pinion gear on the motor shaft. Some telltale signs of this is that even if you're not shooting, your battery will get really hot or really fast. Like you'll plug it in and it'll start heating up. Replica doesn't cycle, there's no power. And then physically, you can generally just tell if the wires are in poor condition. If you have one of the replicas where you plug the battery in the stock and you can see that those wires are starting to strip, that can be a cause of it, a very likely cause. What you want to do for quick fixes, you want to make sure that you isolate this. So you can generally put electrical tape around it. In this case here, this would be either heat shrink, something a little bit more substantial and not as unwieldy since it's in the gearbox. Best case scenario though, or I should say ideally, I would just completely resolder these wires on, take your Dean's connector off the other end, take your wires out of the ETU, put some new wires in there and call it a day. And lastly is unreliable feeding. So essentially this is the catch-all should none of the other steps that involve BB feeding reliability help with BB feeding reliability. So in this case, it's doing it with multiple mags of different types with different ammo capacities. You've tried troubleshooting the mid-cap syndrome. You've tried troubleshooting squib load, so you make sure your barrel's good. You make sure that you're using reliable ammunition. You make sure that your magazines aren't putting too much pressure on that nozzle. What you can do is you can shim the magazine well. So you can see that they've shimmed it laterally by putting some of the fuzzy side of Velcro on the long sides of the magazine well. I found some success putting some tape on the rear side of it as well. What that does is especially if you put it lower here and your catch mechanism is up here, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that the feed lips on the magazine are mating properly with those on the hop chamber. Usually if there's too much play in a magazine, it means those lips are making full contact. It means that the little lever that holds the BBs in isn't getting pressed down. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that your magazines are reliably going into the same place every single time. And that's it. That's really all I have for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you have any other quick tips for players that you'd like to see understand these on the field, let me know. Leave it in the comments. Thanks. Bye.